Dear friends, welcome back to Think BRICS channel. Today we have the distinct pleasure of speaking with Mr. Arlen Agiliga, a Princeton-educated fellow and investment banking analyst at Mongolia International Capital Corporation. Arlen is keen observer of global business and geopolitics, and his insights into emerging markets and the shifting dynamics within the global south are particularly relevant to our audience. We are excited to tap into his expertise, especially in light of recent developments within the BRICS nations and the evolving relationships between key players like China and India. Arlen,
Hi, thank you.
thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah,
It's fascinating to see your current role as you're based in Mongolia.
yeah.
Could you start by telling our audience a little bit more about your work there and what brought you to this unique vantage point?
Of course. So I started out my career in investment banking in New York City, but before I began my career in investment banking, I did a graduate program in China, and during that time, I really realized that my main interest, my main passion was international business, especially in emerging markets and developing markets. So once I started my work in New York City, I was really eager to return to the region in a professional setting. So that's how I ended up in Mongolia working as an investment banker. And right now, my work is pretty much all about um, working with Mongolian businesses, connecting them with international financial institutions, and yeah, really just being a steward for the Mongolian economy and the businesses that power it.
Uh, where are you based in the capital?
Yes, I'm based in the capital of Mongolia. Yeah, Ulan.
How do you find this city?
It's wonderful. The winter is pretty cold, but once you get past the winter, I think it's a beautiful city, and also the Mongolian countryside is there's nothing like it. So yeah, I've had a wonderful time here.
Nice. Well, I wish I could visit once. I don't know. Maybe it will happen.
Yeah, it might.
Okay. Mongolia, it's something strange to hear actually for American and European, I guess.
Yeah,
Uh, Recently on our channel, we discussed the apparent warming of relationships between India and China, referencing President Xi Jinping's statement about the elephant and the dragon dancing together. This aligns with the growing strength of the BRICS alliance. However, in your article, A Tale of Two Stock Markets, you present a nuanced perspective, particularly regarding the economic comparison between India and China. You argue against the simplistic India as the next China narrative. Could you elaborate on why you believe this direct comparison is flawed, especially considering the significant GDP gap you mentioned will likely persist?
of course. So I think that the popular comparison between the Indian and Chinese economies is flawed because India and China they're in fundamentally different economic echelons and levels of global economic competitiveness. So I mentioned in my essay, which I co-authored with Noel Throttle, he's a friend of mine, that even though Chinese GDP growth has slowed relative to Indian GDP growth, there's still a more than $14 trillion gap between the two economies, and that's only expected to widen into the 2030s. And both India's and China's reaction to Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs are rather indicative of their current stature in the global trade order. So we saw that China has been very combative in its response to Donald Trump's tariffs, while India has been very conciliatory, looking to strike a deal as quickly as possible. And I think their responses to the tariffs are very they're very telling with their current places. China feels strong, and it feels like it's in a place to challenge America for sort of the most dominant economy in the world, whereas India feels like it still needs to strike a balance between its own interests and the interests of America. So I think that's really the big thing. That's one of the big things.
In your article, actually, very interesting one. Those ones of our viewers who haven't read that, please find it, and we will give all the links below. Very interesting analysis of Arlen. And your point of view, I share completely that India, it's not a rival, economical rival to China, but to Asian countries like Vietnam, Indonesia.
Yeah.
Um, so, from this perspective, how do you see that rivalry?
Yeah. So I think that the India-China economic rivalry, it's not exactly, of course, they compete with each other, but they don't compete directly with each other. India's main direct competitors, I think, now and going into the future will be, like you said, Indonesia, Vietnam, also even some other countries in the developed world, like some of the larger economies in Europe, because we're basically seeing a bifurcation where America and China are the two largest economies in the world by far. And then around third place, there's Japan, Germany, India, and these countries. And that's really where the most interesting competition will take place because I think the competition for first and second is just so obviously between only China and America. So I think sort of still within the top 10, but past the first two positions, the top 10 of global GDP. I think that's where the most interesting changes will take place in the few years and decades to come. I think India will essentially eclipse Germany. I think also some other emerging economies will continue to climb the ranking. And I think that all of these changes essentially will create a situation where a developing economy, calling an economy developed or calling an economy developing isn't as useful as it was in the past, just because developing economies have become so much more competitive on the global scale.
Just one more question I would like to know for my person. From your article again, you
Mhm.
mentioned that among all the companies that had to left China, only few chose India
Mhm.
to to transfer their manufacturing capacities, but majority went to Vietnam and other Asian countries. But why? For example, 8 companies chose Vietnam, and only 3 went to India.
Yeah, I think, well, first, I think one thing is proximity to China. So some of these companies that needed to move their manufacturing and supply chains away from China, a natural destination would have been Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, where manufacturing wages at least are comparable to China's. And you know, it's just close. It's just close to China. So when you need to move out of China, you don't want to go all the way to India. Instead, you would think I could just move my manufacturing to a Vietnam or a Bangladesh or one of these countries, and that creates that makes the disruptions from moving out of China slightly less significant. I think another thing that makes some of these ASEAN countries more competitive compared to India is the fact that they're in ASEAN. ASEAN is a trade bloc in itself. There's a free trade agreement that makes doing business in those countries more competitive in some sectors than in India. And yeah, I think these factors are what drives some of the decision for ASEAN and countries in it, like Vietnam, compared to India.
You know that the many compare those countries from the point of view of demographic issues. So
Hmm.
we know that those 2 countries, I mean China and India, are the biggest countries in the world from the point of view of population. And actually, when reading your article about moving the industries from China to Vietnam and not to India, to Malaysia and not to India, I suppose maybe there is in India there is a problem with the skillful workers, or I don't know.
I think that's a possibility. I also think that given India's sort of historical background, manufacturing isn't necessarily what multinational firms think of first when they think of India. I think many multinational firms think of sort of like call centers and IT services, since India has a very storied tradition with the ability to speak English, and that makes it a more conducive environment for things like a call center. Also, from an education perspective, lots of lots of multinational corporations go to India to, for example, develop smartphones and things like this. So I think the Indian economy and Indian laborers definitely have the skills that are needed for moving supply chains away from China and into India. But I think what is more impactful could be things like proximity, things like wages, things like free trade agreements, which ASEAN all has more than India.
Okay, I see. Thank you. That's not very often we read that comparison from that point of view, like you did. So it was very interesting. Thank you for that article. But I would like to shift our focus slightly and move to your current position, current
Yeah.
presence of yours in Mongolia. So it also brings to mind the critical role that country plays in the relationship between China and Russia,
Mhm.
particularly concerning energy. We
Yeah.
have seen recent reports about China rejecting Russia's proposal to increase gas exports via Kazakhstan and the ongoing environmental assessment for the Soyuz Vostok pipeline, which would run through Mongolia as a continuation of the Power of Siberia 2.
Mhm.
Could you share your perspective on Mongolia's strategic importance in facilitating these energy flows
Yeah.
and the broader implications for Russia China relations, especially given Gazprom's current financial challenges? We say.
Yeah, so I think that Mongolia plays an incredibly important role in facilitating Russia-China relations, especially when it comes to energy flows, because any pipeline that's built has to run through Mongolia. And I think from the Mongolian perspective, these projects are welcomed because Mongolia's economy is heavily reliant on mining, and any significant investment or project that can diversify Mongolia's economy, the government and the business sector in Mongolia would welcome it. So I think that the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, from the Mongolian perspective, is welcomed. And I think that at least as far as Mongolia-Russian relations go, I think that there's been lots of cooperation and sort of eagerness to get the project started, because it would be a real boon to the Mongolian economy. And I think that where the real bottleneck is, I wouldn't call it a roadblock or a hindrance, but just a bottleneck, is more Russia-China relations. I think that China is taking a bit more strategic approach to the pipeline project, which is why um, things might seem to be moving a little bit slowly. I think from the Chinese perspective, um, additional gas from Russia is definitely welcomed, but I think the Chinese want to structure the negotiations in a way that is overall beneficial to the Chinese economy. And since the Chinese economy is looking to they're looking to increase domestic production of energy. They want to make sure that whatever energy is imported from Russia doesn't disrupt those plans. So I think eventually, I can't really give a timeline, but at least I would imagine, at least in the mid to near term, there should be real progress on the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, because there's been high level talks already for a number of years. So I think in the near to medium future, there should be significant progress on that front. And I think really it's neither the Mongolian or Russian sides that are sort of slowing down the development. It's more the Chinese side. But I think in general, all three powers are interested in seeing the project get done. But I think it's just in terms of speed, the different countries have different priorities.
Yeah, you are right. You mentioned about high level negotiations, and one of the highest level negotiation happened last year when President Putin visited Mongolia. And from Russian side, I could tell you that we okay, it was expected that the issue would have been resolved when Putin visited Mongolian capital. But
Mhm.
actually, he came back without nothing. And many analysts in Russia saw this like a kind of a defeat, because as you told right now that it's not about Russia, it's not about Mongolia, it's about China.
Mhm.
So, and we see there is a lot of research and a lot of information here in Russian side, on the Russian side of the web. They're
Mhm.
talking about that because that part of China where that pipeline should come to is
Mhm.
less populated. It's not so many huge manufacturing capacities there. So the price for the gas would be high.
Mhm. Yeah.
So and Chinese part tries to push Gazprom to invest. Gazprom is the Russian gas supply industry company. China tries to push Gazprom to invest more, and Gazprom says, "Come on, it's not only for us; it's only for you." And
Yeah.
Russia tries to involve Mongolia to invest as well because the pipeline goes through their territory, so it brings benefit also to Mongolia. As
Exactly.
soon as Mongolia depend on China, they cannot decide by themselves only.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
I
that's
think China just has so much geopolitical leverage and economic leverage
exactly.
over Mongolia, and of course, um, its leverage over Russia is kind of increasing. So it's just the ball is really in China's court here.
Yeah. So and that visit of President Putin to Mongolia, uh, do you remember that international court that
Yeah.
issued
Yeah.
in Mongolia? If I remember well, signed that statute, Roman statute, but they did
Mhm.
not arrest Putin because even here in Russia there were a lot of speculation about that, telling that China pushed Mongolia not to do that,
Mhm.
not to arrest Putin.
Yeah, I think that I'm sure from the Chinese side there was encouragement to make sure that the Mongolian government didn't do anything rash. But I think also from the Mongolian perspective, it understands that China and Russia are its two closest neighbors. It's encircled by these two countries, and it wouldn't be in the country's best interests, even though it is a signatory to the Rome Statute. It wouldn't be in its best interests to pursue such destructive measures. And I think that Mongolia isn't really alone in that perspective. I think there are lots of middle powers across the world that understand um, even even when something like that happens, like when Putin comes to visit, for example, when Netanyahu visited America, similar calls were made
Yeah,
by certain groups, but it's just it's not logical. It's not in the country's best interest to act in such ways, especially when other parts of the world do not recognize. Well, they recognize these international laws, but they don't really honor them. And I think from the Mongolian perspective, if larger powers like the United States and others, if they're able to disregard these rules, why should Mongolia not be able to do the same? Especially when, in the Mongolian case, if Mongolia were to arrest Putin, the consequences for Mongolia would be much, much more severe than, for example, if America decided to do the same thing to Netanyahu. So I think, yeah, from the middle power perspective, sometimes, of course, like these laws, these international laws exist, but realistically,
No one
there's
cares.
exactly, yeah, there's just obstacles to implementation.
So we know that International Court of Justice exists,
Yeah,
but who
but
cares?
exactly.
Here at Think BRICS, we talk about BRICS, and I would like to see uh, to look at Mongolia from the BRICS perspective,
Mhm.
because Mongolia's foreign policy reflects a balancing act. We see that it engages with groups like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Non-Aligned Movement, the G77, while exploring closer ties with BRICS. Even Mongolian president attended the BRICS 2024 summit following Putin's controversial visit to Mongolia we discussed right now.
Yeah.
While BRICS membership could boost trade and investment, Mongolia's cautious multi-aligned strategy suggests it's likely exploring closer cooperation without rushing full accession. Do you forecast Mongolia pursuing full membership, BRICS membership soon, or will it prioritize cautious engagement without formal accession?
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, from what I've seen and from what I've studied, certainly the latter. Mongolia's foreign policy has this unique sort of directive called the Third Neighbor Policy, and the Third Neighbor Policy essentially is this idea that Mongolia wants to strengthen its relations with countries other than Russia and China to sort of not necessarily avoid the Russia-China sphere of influence, but hedge against the Russia-China sphere of influence. So important countries to the Third Neighbor Policy are other Central Asian countries like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, etc., and also some of the larger powers of the West, like the United States, France, the UK, these countries. So while Mongolia is definitely interested in continued cooperation with Russia, China, and the other countries of the BRICS, I think the Mongolian perspective is that interaction and engagement and cooperation with these countries is already so strong, and also in some ways so out of Mongolian control that it is in Mongolia's best interest to strengthen partnerships with the rest of the world. At the same time, though, not not just with Russia and China, but with India, another really important member of the BRICS. Mongolia is also seeking to strengthen economic relations. It's looking to export more coal to India for purposes of steel making. So I think that Mongolia is definitely interested in continued cooperation with the BRICS, but I don't foresee Mongolia actively pursuing accession to the BRICS because it already has a, a developed strategy of international engagement that doesn't involve the BRICS. But at the same time, I do think that as BRICS grow stronger, there's definitely an incentive for Mongolia to strengthen relations with the bloc of countries and also independently with the countries that make it up.
Thank you. Arlen, your insights have been incredibly valuable in understanding the complex dynamics at play within the BRICS nations and the broader global South. Before we conclude,
Of course.
could you let our audience know where they can follow your work and
Yes.
stay updated about within your analysis, please?
Yeah. The best place to follow me is substack.com. My Substack newsletter is called The Economy Stupid. The website is thestupideconomy.substack.com. My LinkedIn is Arlen Agiliga. I'm very responsive everywhere, so please feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to discuss BRICS, Global South, international business, the economy. These are things that I'm really passionate about, and it was great talking with you all today.
Thank you one more time. For thank you again for taking the time to share your expertise with our audience.
Of course.
Thank you very much, dear friends of our channel. Let us know if you liked this discussion and if you want to go further in a future discussions with Arlen. Don't forget to support us. Check in the description all the ways you can do it. See you in the next video.